I am Alex, a truck driver who has been on the road for nearly 15 years. The story I'm about to tell happened in 2017. At that time, I was driving an overnight haul across the Mojave Desert in California, heading to a delivery point in Arizona. If I remember correctly, I was hauling home appliances. The sky was pitch black, with no light except my own truck. The headlights of my semi were very dim. I had put off repairing them for far too long. Normally, I would not notice the difference, but with almost no other vehicles on the road, this flaw became more obvious than ever. I remember having to strain my eyes every few minutes to try to see the road ahead. That alone could have become a horror story. I struggled with the idea of pulling over for a few hours to wait for sunrise, but I did not want to waste time. At that point, I really needed the money. So I decided to keep driving even though I knew it was not entirely safe. I told myself that since the road was basically a straight line, everything would be fine. I think I had driven for about an hour before dawn. That was when I saw something rushing toward me very quickly from the distance. Afraid of hitting an animal, I slammed on the brakes. My truck screeched and came to a stop. That's when I realized what was right in front of me. A car with its hazard lights flashing. The strange thing was that it was parked right in the middle of the road, literally on the double yellow line. Even stranger, the passenger door was wide open. My truck had stopped only about a foot away from it. I do not want to brag, but I am a pretty tough guy, and I know how to defend myself after many bar fights. Because of that, I did not feel fear when I saw the car. I was more curious than anything. I thought maybe someone needed a jump or some kind of help. I backed up the truck and pulled over. I thought about putting down some flares, but decided against it. Since the start of this trip, I had not seen a single other vehicle on the road besides this strange car. I stepped out of my truck and walked toward the car. It was a warm, quiet night. I remember thinking how strange it was that there was almost no wind. The night was also incredibly silent. The soft clicking sound of the hazard lights was the only noise in what felt like the entire desert. I got closer to the car. I clearly remember it was a fairly new red Ford Fusion. I approached it cautiously. As I mentioned, the passenger door was wide open. I walked around the car and froze. It was completely empty. I checked carefully, looking into the back seat and any place someone could lie down. Literally, no one was inside. Suddenly, I felt much more uneasy about the situation. I had expected someone who needed help, maybe even someone who had fallen asleep in a stupid place. But I definitely did not expect this. The car was completely empty. I glanced over my shoulder several times, feeling far more nervous. I kept turning my head, looking in every direction. I felt like someone was about to rush out and attack me. The problem was it was so dark that I could not see far beyond the area lit up by my truck's headlights. It was unnerving. I waited a moment, thinking about going back to my truck and forgetting the whole thing. But someone had been out there, somewhere. Against my better judgment, I decided to continue investigating. I looked inside the car, but everything seemed perfectly normal. The key was even still in the ignition, although the engine was off. I stepped out and walked toward the trunk. Might as well take a look, I told myself. I tried to open it, but it would not budge. Locked. I pulled the key from the ignition and unlocked the trunk. Even then, it still would not open. Somehow it was jammed from the inside. I opened the back door and tried to reach the trunk through the rear seats. Surprisingly, it actually opened. Inside were 3 flattened garbage bags, along with a rope that looked like it was used to tie the trunk shut. I glanced over my shoulder once more before reaching into them. Everything seemed clear. I am pretty sure I was only about 5 inches away from one of the bags when the loudest gunshot I had ever heard exploded into the night. I slammed my head into the roof of the car from sheer shock. Without thinking, I tossed the keys onto the front seat and got out as fast as I could. As I scrambled into my truck, I heard a rough, raspy voice shouting from a distance. He yelled, "Hey!" several times, and the voice sounded like it was getting closer fast. I dove into my truck and started the engine. I shifted gears as quickly as possible. I remember cursing several times when the engine stalled at first, and that's when I saw him. As my truck began to roll forward, I saw a man standing at the trunk. He was a short, stocky redhead. He wore overalls and calf-high boots. In his left hand, he held a small shovel. In his right, an old hunting rifle. We locked eyes for a few seconds as my truck passed him. He did not move. I remember he did not look crazy or anything. He looked worried. As I drove past, he dropped the shovel and started waving. He shouted, "Wait," several times, but there was no way I was staying another second. As I drove off, I saw him in my rearview mirror running after my truck for a moment before turning and sprinting back toward his car. Clearly he wanted me to stop, but there was absolutely no chance of that happening. I floored it, pushing the truck faster than I should have. I drove for about 5 minutes and began to think I was safe. But then I saw headlights rapidly approaching behind me. I remember feeling more terrified than at any other moment in my life. I called the police and explained what had happened as clearly as I could. At that moment, the Ford was right behind me. It started honking loudly. Honestly, I did not know what to do, so I just kept driving, praying to God he would not try to ram me. After about 15 minutes of being chased like that, he sped ahead of me and slammed on the brakes, forcing me to slow down. I was about to slam into him when finally a few flashing police lights appeared ahead. The Ford swerved right shot into the desert and vanished from sight. I pulled over and waited for the officer to arrive. I frantically told him everything that had happened, but that useless cop decided to take my statement instead of chasing the guy. I was furious about that. I told him twice he could catch him if he left immediately. The officer reassured me not to worry and said they would conduct a thorough search as soon as backup arrived. He let me go and said they would call me if there were any updates. They never called back. None of my friends have a crazy story like this, and I have told it more times than I can count. I know what you are probably thinking. The guy was definitely burying a body. But that does not really explain why he had such a small shovel or why he tried to chase me. The bags in his trunk were also too small for that, although some of my friends think maybe he dismembered someone. For my own sanity, I prefer to think he was burying some other kind of animal, maybe putting a sick dog out of its misery or burying some dangerous snake. I really have no other idea. Either way, after this experience, I never feel comfortable driving through the desert late at night anymore. Story number 2, the stalkers. You have probably seen some modern videos online where truck drivers record their daily routines and give tips to each other. Or maybe you have not, but because I am in the younger group of this field, whenever I open TikTok or YouTube Shorts, that is all I see. I will not go into personal detail, but I had to drop out of a fairly prestigious college for personal reasons, and everyone always said I could have become someone better than a truck driver. Honestly, the job is not bad at all. I have been delivering freight for over 2 years. Obviously, the only hard part is the long work hours. You can never really understand how isolation will affect you until you experience it firsthand. My only advice is to make peace with whatever demons hide in your subconscious, because they will gnaw at your brain in those lonely hours. That is what happened to me. Anyway, this story happened to me 3 months after I was hired by my first company. I was basically a newcomer. I was driving from southern New Jersey to Lafayette, Indiana, a 12-hour trip. Driving 12 hours does not sound too crazy, but factor in that I had just finished an 8-hour run, which should give you a sense of the situation. I wanted to complete the delivery as fast as possible, so I chose to drive through the night. I would arrive in Lafayette just before 3 a.m. Everything went smoothly with almost no other vehicles on the road, so I could push the truck a bit faster than usual. About halfway through, I remember reaching down into the center console to grab a Red Bull, only to realize there was none. I had forgotten to restock my truck after the previous delivery. After smacking the console a few times, I groaned in frustration, knowing I would have to stop somewhere. Nothing annoys me more than having to stop during a run. I might be the only one, but I always feel twice as tired when my truck is standing still, even if I stop for only 20 seconds. After checking the GPS, I realized I had no choice. Either fall asleep on the road or stop and buy an energy drink. In my head, those two options were almost equal. I reluctantly pulled into the first service stop I saw. I had no idea where I was, probably Ohio at that point. Too late, I realized it was not actually a service stop. It looked like an abandoned gas station and a repurposed convenience store. I'm not sure how else to describe it. Anyway, it seemed there was another quick stop a little farther down the road, so I figured I would go there instead. I parked the truck and walked toward the first convenience store. Honestly, I was expecting one of two things. Either the store would be open, or the door would be locked. You can imagine my surprise when the door opened, leading into a pitch-black store. I looked around, hoping I might get lucky and find a leftover drink or snack. Just as I was about to head back, my eyes adjusted to the dark, and I noticed a faint light coming from the corner of the room. I walked toward it and found it came from a back room. Curiosity got the better of me, and I slowly opened the door. To my surprise, there was a plugged-in refrigerator against the wall. I eagerly opened it, but found nothing. Literally nothing. The shelves had been removed as if the whole thing had been gutted. As I was closing the door, I was 90% sure I heard a clattering sound from the main room, like something falling to the floor. I froze for about 10 seconds. Was I imagining things? No way. I quietly walked back to the main room and looked around. Nothing. Part of me wanted to keep investigating. However, I did not have the time for this. I walked out the door and basically jogged to the other store. Thank God it was open. I bought my drink and headed back to my truck. Something about that stop made me feel uneasy. I needed to get back on the road as soon as possible. I looked one last time at the abandoned store and noticed the door was now wide open. I was 100% sure I had closed it behind me. However, figuring out what was going on was not my business, so I started the engine and merged back onto the highway. The caffeine started to kick in quickly, pulling me out of my tired haze. My mind began to wander, and I started thinking about how weird the whole situation was. I guess having someone hiding inside an abandoned building is not the strangest thing in the world, but my brain could not explain that refrigerator, no matter what theory I came up with. I tried to forget it and kept driving. That is when I started noticing strange movements in the curtain behind me. Sweat began dripping down my forehead. I watched through the rearview mirror as the curtain seemed to puff and move even though I did not have the air conditioning on. I thought of the worst. Someone was in my truck. I had no weapon on me, so I discreetly dialed the nearest police station on my phone. The 20-minute drive there was the most tense and terrifying of my life. I kept imagining that person reaching out to grab me or trying to crash my truck. Finally, I approached the police station. I parked the truck as close as possible and basically ran inside. Within seconds, my truck was surrounded by officers, and after I opened the back, what I saw will haunt me forever. The police pulled out 3 people who looked homeless, 2 men and 1 woman. They were dressed in rags and wrapped in filthy blankets. One of the men was armed with 2 switchblades. All 3 refused to speak, but stared at me menacingly as they were handcuffed. I do not know what they wanted. I do not think I ever will. My name is Kevin, but in this story, I am still Alex. I have been a truck driver for many different companies over the past 15 years. At this point, everything has become quite familiar, receiving goods and materials, verifying their accuracy, and delivering them as instructed. We are not paid by the hour, so efficiency is the most important thing in this industry. For someone who has done this job as long as I have, I like to think that I can work harder than all the younger drivers taking on these jobs. However, this is not always a good thing. Usually, I push myself to the absolute limit when I have to operate with almost no sleep. 4 years ago, I was working for a warehouse in North Dakota. For those who don't know, North Dakota is one of the flattest states, which makes truck driving a little easier. It also means that skipping a few hours of sleep can make the difference between keeping your job and being fired. It was a chilly Tuesday morning in May. Starting the work week meant more shipments needed to be transported, and that also meant more work for me. I wanted to finish everything in one go, so I mapped out my route to Montana accordingly, planning not to stop for rest even once. I hit the road a few hours after lunch, expecting to reach my destination early the next morning. I pushed the truck as hard as I could, probably going a little over the speed limit. It was late, and I remember rubbing my eyes as the clock passed midnight. I was starting to struggle to keep them open, but I was only about an hour away. So I gritted my teeth and kept driving. My friend Tristan, also a truck driver, introduced me to smelling salts when I first started driving. If you don't know, smelling salts are basically some kind of crystals kept in a small bottle. Just one inhale and you become instantly alert. However, you must be careful. Tristan said using them too many times in a row can be dangerous. They make your nose burn a bit, but whenever I needed a boost, smelling salts were always my first choice. This was one of those times. I took a deep breath and leaned my head back as the reflex hit me. I felt the adrenaline rush through my body and hoped that feeling would last for the rest of the drive. Half an hour passed, and I was really struggling. I felt myself starting to nod off, and the blaring alarm when my truck drifted onto the shoulder jolted me awake. This is way too dangerous, I thought. I needed to pull over. I was completely alone on the highway, but there was nowhere to stop. Just forest on both sides. I slowed the truck down, desperately searching for a place to pull over. At this lower speed, my headlights cut through the darkness, and I could see more. As I looked around, I saw something that confused me, a purple dress lying in the middle of the road. What the hell is that? I thought, rubbing my eyes. Was I hallucinating? I blinked about 6 times just to make sure I wasn't going crazy. It was real. I approached the dress with my truck and stared at it as I rolled past. Looking back, that should have been a much bigger red flag, but I think I was too exhausted to process what was happening. About 200 meters ahead, I passed a pair of shoes. Now I was starting to panic. What the hell was going on? I drove past the shoes, praying that a place to stop would appear soon. My late father, David, was a very religious man, so I gripped his old cross and hoped he would help me. A bit farther ahead, I saw another pile of random clothes, some of which looked like children's clothing. This time, I stopped the truck. Panic began to set in. Something was very, very wrong. I sat in the driver's seat, the truck completely still. I waited for something to happen, but nothing did. So I followed my instincts. I stepped out of the truck and went to check the pile of clothes. I still remember the cold morning air cutting through my skin, which definitely helped wake me up more. I approached the pile as cautiously as possible. They were children's clothes. There seemed to be clothing for both boys and girls in the pile. I looked around toward the forest, but I couldn't see much in the darkness. I kept turning my head, worried that this might be some kind of trap. I decided that figuring out what was happening wasn't my responsibility, so I turned back toward the truck. Right then, I heard a rustling sound from the left. I snapped my head around, trying to see what it was. I stood still, listening for another sound. After about 30 seconds, there was another rustling. but this time from the opposite side of the road. My survival instincts kicked in, and I sprinted toward the truck. I jumped into the front seat, but right before I slammed the door shut, a child's scream echoed through the air. I froze, my heart nearly exploding out of my chest. I was stuck at a crossroads. I wasn't going to fight some random people in a pitch-black forest, but I also couldn't abandon helpless children. Before I could decide, another childlike scream echoed, nearly identical to the first one. Without thinking, I started the truck and pointed the headlights toward the part of the forest where I heard the sound. My headlights illuminated about 30 meters into the trees. There were 3 or 4 people, one of them holding a large speaker. They crouched behind a few trees when my headlights hit them, but I had exposed them long enough to realize what they were doing. They hid from the light before I could see any identifying features, but I swear on my father David's grave, they were holding a speaker, trying to lure me into the woods using fake child screams. I was completely shocked. I just sat there staring at the trees they had hidden behind. I reached for my phone to call the police, but before I could finish dialing, I heard a thud against the side of the truck. Someone had thrown something from the other direction. I was done. I turned the truck back toward the road and hit the gas. As I sped away, I saw a man on the other side of the road. He yelled something I couldn't understand before throwing something at the truck, cracking my passenger side window. I drove the rest of the way in silence. I was too terrified to process what had just happened, but there was no way I was stopping to sleep in that forest. I finished the delivery and then passed out. I probably slept for 10 straight hours. I called the police and recounted the entire incident in as much detail as I could. As I was trying to explain everything, the red Ford pulled up dangerously close to the back of my truck. He started honking like a madman, the piercing sound echoing through the desert night. To be honest, I had absolutely no idea what to do, except keep my foot on the gas and pray to God that the bastard wouldn't intentionally ram into my truck. He stayed right behind me, just a few feet away, and I could feel the insanity and danger radiating from him. 15 minutes passed in absolute tension. He kept swerving, trying to overtake me. Finally, the Ford cut in front of my truck and slammed on the brakes, forcing me to slow down abruptly. I nearly crashed into the back of his car when, finally, a few flashing police lights appeared ahead. The moment he saw the red and blue lights, the Ford jerked to the right, sped off into the desert, and vanished into the darkness. I pulled over and waited for the officer to arrive. I stumbled out of my truck and told the officer everything that had happened, rambling and furious. But the cop was completely useless. Instead of immediately chasing the suspect, he decided to take my statement first. I was furious beyond belief. I told him at least twice that if he acted right now, he could catch the bastard before he got too far into the desert. The officer simply tried to reassure me in a cold, detached tone, saying I didn't need to worry and that they would begin a thorough search once backup arrived. He finished writing his report, let me go, and said they would call me if there were any updates. They never called back. The days after and theories I completed my delivery, but that experience haunted me for weeks. I told that story to more coworkers and close friends than anything else that had ever happened to me. Not a single one of my trucker friends had a story as insane and bizarre as this. We often sat together and tried to analyze every detail. I know exactly what everyone, and probably you, is thinking. That guy was definitely burying a body. That's the most common theory, considering the emptiness of the desert, the gunshot, and the trash bags in his trunk. However, there are some details that make me doubt that theory. The small shovel. If he was burying a body, why did he only bring a small shovel? Digging a deep and wide enough hole in the rock-hard desert ground, with that would take hours, maybe an entire night. The size of the bags. The trash bags I saw in the trunk were too flat and too small to hold a human body. Some of my friends suggested he might have dismembered it, which is an even more horrifying thought. His pursuit, why did he chase me? If he was burying evidence of a crime, the logical thing to do would be to grab his stuff and flee in the opposite direction. Cutting in front of my truck and slamming the brakes, drawing attention, is the act of someone desperate about something more important than getting caught. For my own sanity, I came up with another theory. I like to think he was burying some kind of animal. Maybe a sick pet he wanted to put down discreetly, or some dangerous creature, like a venomous snake, he captured or owned illegally. The gun could have been used to kill the animal, and the small shovel would be enough to bury something not too large. Still, I really have no solid idea. Ever since that experience, I no longer feel comfortable driving through empty desert highways at night. Just seeing a car stopped on the road is enough to send a chill down my spine. I had to call the police right after escaping from the group of people who tried to lure me into the woods with fake screams. I drove my truck to the nearest police station right after finishing my delivery and waking up. It was the first thing I did. I called the police and told them the entire story, including finding the clothes, the rustling sounds, and finally seeing those people with the speaker they used to play the fake child screams. They said they would send someone to investigate the forest and would update me. They also never called back. After that, I thought about the whole situation and realized how stupid I had been to step out of my truck. I should have ignored everything and gone on with my job. But the thought of a kidnapped child or something worse was too heavy for me to ignore. To this day, I still have no clear idea what those people were trying to do. I don't know why they didn't attack me when they had the chance, or what they intended to do if I had run into the woods after hearing the fake child scream. Tonight's story ends here. If you have a real horror story, send it to Dark Whispers Audio. Let's share the fear together. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell, because the next whisper might come sooner than you think.